Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to the last video of 2019 on a Tuesday. Not on a Wednesday where I normally upload Wednesdays and Sundays, but it's the last day of the year and I wanted to upload the tops and flops of 2019 on the last day of the year. So I make an exception here. Ooh, me, exception. Anyway, if you're following my channel, you know that during the year I uploaded tops and flops for every month, not for December, because I just want to wrap up the year in December. I looked at the books that I read and then I limited myself for this video, for the tops and flops 2019, to books that were published in English in 2019. I read about 50 books that fit this particular category, and I chose my tops and flops from this category only. That means that first of all, I read more books than that, and some of the books that I read outside of this category were fantastic. So that doesn't mean that I didn't read other books published earlier or classics that weren't great, but for this particular category, books released in 2019, these are my 5 tops and my 5 flops. They are not ranked, the top 5. I just talk about them in the order that I read them. So there are 10 books to talk about, and that also means, because I want to keep this video at a sort of kind of reasonable length, that I'm not going to talk at length of about each book. I talked about each of the books except for one in other videos, so if you're interested in learning more about a book, you can check out these other videos. Anyway, first up is the book that I read in March. And I think it was my first 5-star read of the year, and that's a memoir, Anne Summers, Unfettered and Alive. Anne Summers is an Australian author, editor, publisher, writer, columnist. She was born in 1945. And the book chronicles her career, her life as a journalist back in Australia. She went into politics, then moved to the US. She changed her career multiple times. She was the chairwoman of Greenpeace International, and she is a friend of mine. I have to say that. But I read the book together with Jacqueline over at 6 Minutes for Me, and Jacqueline loved it as well. It's a fascinating life, and if you're into memoirs, I can highly recommend this book. Next up, the second in the top 5 is a book that I read in July, and if you're following my channel, you might not be surprised because it's Janet Winterson's Frankenstein. And Janet Winterson, a British writer, is one of my favorites ever since I read her first book, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. Frankenstein is playing on the Frankenstein theme, but set in different timelines. We follow Mary Shelley in 1816 while she comes up with the idea for the book, but the other timelines are set in Britain, Brexit Britain, and in Arizona, and there's a sort of futuristic twist to the story about cryogenics, but also about robots, and how that all plays into the Frankenstein theme. It's done playfully, well written, funny at times, and thought-provoking. So yeah, I loved the book. The next book, the third book in the tops category, is a straightforward sci-fi book. You know how I love sci-fi, so what would the tops be without a sci-fi? It's a novella by Becky Chambers, To Be Taught If Fortunate. You may know Becky Chambers from her Wayfarer trilogy. Long Way to a Small Angry Planet was the first one. I love those books, and this novella is sci-fi, I said that already, and it's set in an exploration vessel to go to various planets where there was discovered extraterrestrial life. So we follow the crew on the journey to these various planets, and the main question of the book and why it was so fascinating and thought-provoking is, how do we humans deal with encountering extraterrestrial life? How do we do that? How do we communicate? How do we look at these creatures that we don't know? And it also addresses the question of what happened to Earth while this vessel is away. It was entertaining, but also thought-provoking. Even though it was a short book, 150 pages, it made me think for a long time after I finished it. The fourth book in the tops is more a serious book and not an easy read, and that is Edna O'Brien's latest novel, Girl. I love Edna O'Brien's work. She writes a lot about the aftermath of war. The last book I read before this one, Little Red Chairs, deals with the aftermath of the Yugoslavian war. And this one is set in Africa and follows a young girl, 12, 13, when she is captured by rebels, brought to their camp. She has to live there, but she escapes, and a lot of the book then tells us the story of what happens once she escapes and goes back home, because her ordeal is not over with the escape. Like I said, not an easy read, but fascinating, important, well written, and the way the life of this young girl, teenager, is described was just heartbreaking and beautiful. Oh, and the last two books I read in respectively September and October. And then we are up to December. And the last book in the tops is a debut novel, Laura Prescott, The Secrets We Kept. This is a sort of a spy theme. It's set in the Cold War in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and we follow a group of women working for the CIA, officially as secretaries, but doing spy work in the after hours. And the spy theme is to get hold of a manuscript of Boris Pasternak's famous book, Dr. Zhivago, that he just finished, and get it published, because publication was not allowed in the Soviet Union. So part of the book is also set in the Soviet Union. We follow Boris Pasternak while he is trying to get the book published from the perspective of his lover Olga, and how these various worlds collide. It's not your typical spy novel. It's more character focused, especially on the women in the book, about the chauvinistic world they have to live in and work in. And it was endearing. It was entertaining and endearing. It was not a perfect book, I grant you that, but I really enjoyed every minute of it. Okay, these were the tops. On to the flops. And again, in the order that I read them, so no particular ranking. And the first book was a book that I read in the spring, and that was Joyce Carol Oates' new novel, My Life as a Rat. If you look at my Goodreads, I gave it 3 stars. So it's not a bad book, and Joyce Carol Oates can write, but I didn't think that it was worthy of her as a writer. It's a book about a young woman, Violet, looking back at her life, and we learn that as a teenager, she was responsible for the fact, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but this is not a spoiler because it's on the back of the book. But anyway, she was responsible for the fact that her brother went to jail. And she reflects back on that incident and what it meant for her life. And I thought that was a really an interesting theme. But the book was just sort of, not coming together in any way. And it was just meh. And I normally don't include a meh book in my flops, but from a writer of the reputation and experience, and also the standing of Joyce Carol Oates, I definitely expect more. The next book in the flops category was a book that was not just meh, but it really irked me. I thought it was bad. And that was a nonfiction book, Lisa Taddei's Three Women. I know I'm in the minority here, but you'll have to live with that. Lisa Taddei is a journalist, and the idea for the book I thought was brilliant. She followed three women in the United States over the course of 8 years in order to write a book about female sexual desire. I'm all in for that. Only the book is not about sexual desire. It's about women who try to accommodate men, and the writing is bad most of the time. There's also this sort of thread through it about the mother of the author who, yeah, I don't even know where to start. For me, this book was completely not what I thought it was meant to be. It was not about female desire. It was not reflective. It was not well written. So I hated it. There you go. Book number 3 in the flops is a novel by a writer I often enjoy. I like her work, but not this time. And I'm talking about Margaret Atwood's The Testaments, the follow-up, the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which I think is brilliant. The follow-up takes place a decade or a decade and a half after the end of The Handmaid's Tale, and it's sort of fan fiction for the TV show, because a lot of what happens there is sort of incorporated, but not really, and not well done. The characters are flimsy. The plot is flimsy. The writing is just about bearable, but not good. Again, a writer of Margaret Atwood's standing. I'm amazed that she can write that badly, but obviously she can. It was just not worth it. It was hyped, that doesn't help, but I read this with a group of people, and thankfully we all agreed that it was not a good book. So despite the hype, I really tried to give the book my full attention, and in my view, it was just a really bad book. The next one is a BookTube darling. And again, me being the minority, I can see where some people like the book, but it was absolutely not for me. And that is Jessie Burton's latest novel, The Confession. I know Jessie Burton is beloved for her books, her previous books. I've never read her, so this was my first experience, and I will probably never read a book by her again, because it's not my style. The book is about the friendship of two women, Constance and Elise, in the 1980s in Los Angeles, when Constance is on the verge of becoming a famous screenwriter, and 30 or so years later, when Elise's daughter, Rose, is looking for her mother, who disappeared just after Rose was born. And then she finds out about Constance, and she wiggles her way into Constance's life in order to find out what happened to her mother. If this plot sounds a bit far-fetched, and, yes, it is for me. I couldn't believe one single thing about the plot. I thought there were a lot of plot holes, things that just happened, like coincidentally, and they had to, because otherwise the plot wouldn't go any further. I thought the characters were extremely cardboard and, for me, one-dimensional. They had no depth and no reality to them. I didn't like the writing particularly. So my conclusion is that Jessie Burton, as beloved as she might be and as successful as a writer she might be, she is just not for me. And we finish off with the minority theme, because the next book, again, many people loved it. And that is a debut novel by Madhuri Vijay, The Farfield. It's a novel set in India. Our main character is Shalini, from a wealthy family in Bangalore. And the first timeline takes place during her teenage years in Bangalore. And her mother is kind of a weird woman. I mean, she's funny at times, but I wouldn't want to meet her. And then there is this salesman from Kashmir who comes and who strikes up a friendship with her mother, and then he disappears. And after the mother died, we are now 10 years or so later, Shalini decides that she will go to Kashmir and try to find this Ahmed, this salesman, who obviously meant something to her mother. I read this book with Sean, thankfully, because we both hated it. And it's the one book that I mentioned earlier that I haven't filmed an in-depth review. Instead, I will link Sean's review because I just nodded along at every sentence that he made. I thought it started really strong. The first couple of chapters were riveting and engaging, and the writing was really good throughout the book. So there is hope for this writer, for me. But this particular story, after chapter 4 or 5, neither the characters, nor their motivation, nor the story made any sense. Again, it was just put together coincidences, things that happened in order to further the plot. The characters did stuff that really didn't make any sense from what we learned about them in previous chapters. Just a no for me. And it was a real disappointment because so many people that I watch on BookTube and Goodreads, I look at their reviews on Goodreads, they all loved the book. And I didn't. I thought it was really bad. And thankfully for me, I had a buddy reader who agreed with me and who made a whole video about it. So I can refer you to that if you want to know more about the Farfield. Anyway, these were my tops and flops of 2019. In bracket, the new releases in English, the 50 books or so I read in this category, and the 10 I picked for my tops and flops. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Talk to me in the comments if you agree or disagree with me, or if you want to let me know which was your favorite book or the worst book you read in 2019. I wish you all a very happy start of 2020, and I will see you next year then. Bye.